Great. So we're going to end this ChefConf here with you fine people talking about compliance. Not really a subject that excites a lot of people. We could be talking about a lot of really hardcore DevOpsy kind of stuff, and we'll touch on some of that stuff. But really, it's all about a necessary sort of thing that a lot of us have run into, and we'll be talking a little bit about the kind of things I saw as a DevOps person kind of going through compliance. So thank you for coming. A little bit of animation there, but about me, who am I? What do I do, and how come I'm talking about compliance in front of you guys? So I've been doing DevOps and cloud stuff for about 5 years. I'm definitely not an internal audit type of guy. I'm not what do they call them, GRC, governance, risk, and compliance dude. So I'm not going to be the guy that comes to you and looks for all of that data. I've just been a DevOps guy that has gone through a few compliance audits and got a little bit of scarring on the back because of that. But I survived. I'm here. I'm talking to you guys. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I did some heavy chef work for about 3 years. Working at Adobe, building a lot of the components for Creative Cloud, and that's where I built a lot of that sort of chef experience. Awesome tool. I'd love to hear about a lot of the new stuff that's getting announced around Chef. It's just the most awesome thing. And I actually did speak at ChefConf a couple of years ago, and it's amazing. I love how much it's grown over the years. What have I done in the past before discovering that I had a real knack of spinning up thousands of EC2 instances in Amazon? I'm actually an old Unix throatbeard from way back in the day. Did a lot of Unix work, spent a lot of time doing a lot of whole different things. If you've done a lot of Unix work back in the day, you kind of touched everything, including security. So I've done security in the past, currently doing security again. But definitely fell in love with the DevOps world once that kind of started getting strong. Like I said, have some compliance experience for sure, having gone through some PCI compliance audits, SOC 2, and kind of prepping for ISO 27001. I'm spewing a whole bunch of terms that you guys are probably not familiar with, but maybe you are. You're here in the session, right? But I definitely have gone through it, and we'll touch on some of the things I've learned doing that. And I now talk to people about security for a living. That's what I do. I love coming out and sort of marrying the two worlds of DevOps and security. Work for the company Evident.io that's on the bottom of the slide there, but we love talking to DevOps people about security. It's the thing. Like I tell people, is like what would happen if a bunch of DevOps guys built a security company, and that's literally what we've done. So totally speak your guys' language. And just a totally random fact: I recently built a Raspberry Pi 2. Help the kids build it, and I love tinkering with stuff. That's what I do. All right, so let's get into it. Just kind of as a show of hands, we're a small group, so I can kind of involve you guys a little bit more. As a show of hands, how many of you guys are DevOps pros? You guys are doing DevOps for a living. That's what you do. You do deployments. How many of you guys are like auditors? You guys have done that line of work. Okay, cool. Awesome. I'm your friend, bro. Of those of you guys that are doing DevOps work, how many of you have actually gone through or going through compliance right now? Some kind of audit. Awesome. All of you guys, right? So a lot of this is going to resonate with you. And, you're definitely going to, hopefully I'll see a lot of nods, As I was prepping for today, I actually took a guy out. He's an internal compliance and security manager at my old job at Adobe. I took him out to lunch, and I said, Wayne, I'm going to talk to a bunch of DevOps people about compliance. Now's your chance to redeem yourself because, we work really closely together, and, we sort of built a little bit of a friendship there. And I said, give me a quote. Give me something to tell a bunch of people at ChefConf. And he's like, he kind of thought about it, and he's like, well, he still is an internal audit guy, but he's like, the thing I can say is when management comes and tells you that you're going to do compliance, I mean, you have to do it, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So he said, just embrace it, because really what it comes down to it, you're going to build, if you don't already have a bunch of best practices, you're going to build even more. So use that as a positive. And I kind of told him, it's like, well, would you agree that in one respect, right, as a DevOps pro, right, I can bring all of my skills for automating all of the things to compliance? And he says, absolutely you can. I'm not going to quote that, but that's for you to tell everybody. But absolutely. So he definitely left me with these words: don't fight it, embrace it, because you guys as DevOps practitioners, you guys are going to build a ton more best practices that you can use in your arsenal. And guess what? Once you go through one compliance audit, you can definitely take a lot of what you've built, a lot of that tooling, a lot of that automation, and go on to the next one. So if you're going through like SOC 2, a lot of that is going to resonate, and it's going to actually help you if you go through like PCI, for example. All right, so what is compliance? Boiled down, it's the three monkeys, right? Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil as a compliance person. I don't want to see this, right? But oh well, I've got to, right? I have to. Boiled down, it's really about assessing the risk in your environment and implementing governance. That's really what it's about. These are like, two words that as DevOps people, we don't really want to hear. We don't want to really hear, especially that second word, right? We don't want to hear governance, right? That's like, somebody coming and telling me what I got to do all the time, right? We don't really want to hear that. But that's what it is. It's really about that. And there's a whole bunch of standards around it, different ways of doing things, and I'll get into that a little bit. And the other thing is most compliance frameworks are about mandating government and industry-specific certification. So it's really about, if you're taking credit cards and you're processing payments, you're definitely going to be going through PCI compliance, definitely. But it's also about, in some compliance frameworks, it's also about, sort of what is your risk, not so much in terms of security, but in terms of the availability of your application. So there's some good stuff there too. Okay, we can resonate with that. There's some stuff there that I can deal with. But what it's not, compliance is not security. I can tell you that much. Just because you're PCI compliant doesn't mean you don't have to do a whole bunch of other security best practices in your environment. It's not security. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that does cover a lot of security best practices, but it's definitely not security. And finally, compliance is you. Compliance is you. Like I was just talking about, it's not just because management says you got to go do this. You have a huge part in the process. As a DevOps practitioner, you're definitely going to be tapped by the audit team. You're going to be tapped by your boss. You're going to be asked to do a whole bunch of stuff. It's a lot about you. Believe it or not, you have a huge part in getting that certification and passing that audit. A couple of examples of regulatory and industry compliance standards and certifications. There's HIPAA if you're in the healthcare industry. There's FISMA, FedRAMP if you're doing work, if you're considered like a cloud provider to the federal government and you're doing business with the federal government. There's industry compliance, SOC 2, best practices, availability, security, PCI, ISO 27001, especially for a lot more of the security standards. Definitely. So there's a bunch. I mean, I've just rattled off a few that I've kind of gone through, but there's a whole bunch more, probably some stuff that you guys are going through. All right. What's a typical compliance workflow look like? Definitely you're going to be doing a lot of definitions. So a lot early on, auditors, internal audit teams are not going to necessarily invite you to some of those meetings. They're definitely not going to invite you to defining some of the things that you're eventually going to test against. But they're going to kind of come up with a very sort of, high-level definition of the different things that you're going to be touching on. And those things are actually later on going to be called controls. They're going to be things that you're going to test against. But first, before that, you're going to be doing some discovery. So these internal audit teams are going to be discovering certain things about how you manage processes, how do you document, how do you, sort of give people passwords when they first come into the company, how do you make sure that that person's account is gone once they leave the company. So they're going to be doing a lot of discovery, and based on that discovery, they're going to write those controls. And what are controls? Controls are the very detailed checks that they're going to make in your environment. They're basically what you're going to be tested against eventually. And then at that point, from the control section, and you as a DevOps person could be responsible for a few controls depending on how your play slices up. But generally speaking, as DevOps people, we're kind of jacks of all trade. We cover, especially in cloud environments, we're definitely covering the server aspect of things. I'm deploying EC2 instances, for example, in AWS. I'm deploying storage. So, we're using S3, EBS, whatever it is. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm responsible for, up to and including deploying applications, right? So I cover a wide gamut of things. So being that jack of all trades, that person that kind of glues all these things together, I'm going to be responsible for giving a lot of that data. So where do I fit in? All right, and so the sort of the last bubble there is kind of the continuous cycle of things that I need to do. But as a DevOps guy, definitely I'm going to be involved in the controls, like I was just saying. I'm definitely going to be involved in testing. So testing, what do I do here? This is where I'm going and checking against those controls. Like, for example, let's just say I have to make sure that my firewall settings on the EC2 security group are set up in a certain way. And I have to go give that report to the internal auditor. That's what the control says, right? I'm responsible for gathering that evidence, is how they're going to call it. It's basically the output of all of my security groups and giving that nice big PDF report over to the internal audit team, right? So I'm definitely going to be involved in the test. And you better believe I'm going to be involved in the remediation, right? There's no testing without actually going and fixing that. So that's the cycle of test, remediate, and report and certify. This is continuous. Just because you've done that SOC 2 compliance once doesn't mean that you're not going to do it again, right? This continuous. You're going to be doing this every 6 months, every year, depending on the certification, but you're going to be doing this continuously. So all that work you did beforehand in the control section, that's going to be hugely important when you get to that continuous cycle. You're going to be doing it over and over again. So that's why I say you're super important to this whole workflow. All right. Let's talk a little bit about a fictional company. I'm not saying it's my previous employer, but it could be. I call it SoftCorp. SoftCorp is going to be announcing a new suite of products that, it's going to be sort of enterprise grade. They're going to be announcing the suite where, we're going to be selling it possibly to some government agencies or something like that. So either way, management decided, because some audit company says you have to go get SOC 2 compliance. Right, but you can replace SOC 2 with PCI if you're going to start taking credit cards. So what did the timeline for compliance and certification look like? So they were told that we were told definitely you're going to have to get SOC 2 compliance. So this is the tell. So back to the previous slide, the define and discovery phase. That and I apologize, I have to cycle through they're cool animations until you have to go backwards. Apologies there. So the define and discovery phases, that depending on the size of the environment that you're working in SoftCorp's case, that took about 4 months. So it takes a while. It takes a while to go figure things out. Depends on the size of your environment. In the case of SoftCorp, they have a huge PaaS that they're responsible for. And in this PaaS, there's a lot of products that connect into it and do all kinds of crazy things, right? So this is a big, massive environment. There's a lot of infrastructure. There's a DevOps team of about 10 people that are responsible for doing, kind of being the guardians of the deployments and, the infrastructure that's there. So it takes a long time for all of the internal audit teams to kind of go probe and interview DevOps people, interview developers that are writing a lot of the application stack. It took a really long time. Then the actual control writing, the actual piece where they're going to come to you and ask you to, well, help us out. We know nothing about AWS. We know nothing about Chef. We don't know what those things are. The auditor, once told me, hey, when I heard the word Chef, I thought, somehow the kitchen staff was going to get involved, right? Literally, that's what I heard, right? So, so this is a lot of that phase where you, and I'm going to get very much into, kind of advice giving. This is the phase where you, as the DevOps person, can go educate that compliance auditor, right? This is where you get to mold them and you get to say, the mwahaha, I got you now, right? Because to be frank, a lot of these people, they don't know anything about configuration management. They don't know anything about automation. Well, they might know a little bit about that, but they're definitely not going to know about Chef and the cloud, right? So this is where you have your chance to go and educate them. So that takes about 3 months, and then the test and remediate and report phase, that's probably the longest piece of it, because now we get to actually apply all of these controls. We get to run through a few mock audits internally before the actual external auditor comes in. And so this is where your time is going to be sunk quite a bit, right? You're going to be helping with the testing. You're going to be helping with the remediation. You're going to be going to interviews with auditors. You're going to be asked why. So that took about 6 months for SoftCorp to get over. So all in all, the total effort to get SOC 2 compliance, and finally, the external auditor comes in and they test here and there, and they're probably not going to do as thorough of a test as the internal audit team, because that there's a whole lot of stuff there, right? So they're probably going to poke here and there, and you're probably going to get asked to provide some evidence for certain things, like how are you sure that your instances are configured all exactly the same way for that particular application, right? We're all Chef pros here, right? We know Chef, right? Easy answer, right? Well, they're going to want a little bit more proof than just a smile and, yeah, Chef, right? So they're going to actually want to go take a look at some of that stuff. But, once that happened and they were able to get their certification, it took about 12 months. It took about 12 months of 4 dedicated people. These are the internal audit team. This is like, the dudes that are dragging you into meetings every couple of days, right? And, you're like, man, I've got like a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm working on. I can't be in this meeting. And then there's the 4 partially dedicated people, which, at first it seems like you're not really partially dedicated, but you are, right? Because you're still responsible for the day-to-day ops of your application stack, right? Your company's well-being. You got to go do that. So it takes a really long time. I didn't really go and calculate how much that is in people hours, but it's a long-ass time. It's a lot of hours, right? But to be frank, a lot of this stuff is overlapped. There's a lot of overlap between the test, remediate, define, control. It could be that sometimes we go through a mock audit, so we have to go all the way back and kind of like rewrite some of those controls. That happens a lot. That happens a lot, right? So be prepared for a lot of that type of work. And then after that, finally, when that external auditor leaves and you've got the stamp of approval, you're not done. Like I said earlier, it's continuous. That final phase is continuous. You're going through it over and over again every 6 months. So again, keep the faith. You got to keep going. So compliance is for humans. Just know this, that compliance is for the people aspect of your company. It's not for technology necessarily. I should have put a little asterisk there, but because it kind of is. But it's really about, kind of making people behave a certain way and have certain standards, right? It's really about how business is conducted. out there. It's about how I make sure that I safeguard credit card information. We hear about that all the time. About companies getting breached, and it's unfortunate, but it's really about sort of governing and governing people and mitigating risk and how people behave. But one thing I can tell you, like I was alluding to earlier, auditors and compliance officers don't really understand the cloud or DevOps. They really don't know what you do. A lot of these people are coming from the outside. They're hired guns. They're contractors usually, and they're coming in, not knowing your environment. They're coming in not really, having the same level of love for your application and what you've built. They don't have that sense of pride necessarily. They're just here because they got to go take a look at all of those cold, hard facts about your environment, right? They're going to look at it coldly sometimes, right? So, they're going to seem harsh, a little bit. They're definitely going to seem as more like, here comes the Bobs again, right? Kind of a thing, right? So, this is where you have to embrace this and mold them in your way. This is your chance to teach somebody who has absolutely no clue about what you do, and teach them a little bit about what you do, right? I love doing that. I love teaching. I have to say, in the time that I was working with Wayne, who I quoted earlier, I actually enjoyed my time with him because he was one of those type of auditors that was willing to kind of learn. At first, he was kind of like coming in as a hard ass, just like a lot of these guys. But the one audit guy in the front, he's going to disagree with me. We spoke yesterday. It's all cool, man. But at the end of the day, you have a chance. I'm not saying they're all like that, but you have a chance to show him some love. You have a chance to show them, what our community is all about, right? We're all about teaching people the best way to do things, right? And so I have that chance to mold this compliance person in my way, right? The other fact is that you'll have to talk to a lot of people, right? This is where your soft skills come into play, right? Where your interpersonal skills come into play. You're going to have to talk to a lot of people, a lot of internal auditors, a lot of managers, a lot of pointy-haired boss types, that are telling you what to do. So, what I would say for that is, make sure you bring a laptop to your meeting. I'm not saying to bring, your phone and start playing Clash of Clans in the middle of a meeting or anything like that. I mean, I guess you could, but, that might not be a good thing when you get asked the question. I'm sorry, man, I'm building that last castle. But definitely bring a laptop and be ready to answer questions when people ask you. But there's going to be, I'm not going to lie to you, there's going to be a lot of boring meetings that really don't involve you, but your input's important. So be there and be ready. Definitely what you don't want to do is you don't want to take questions about what you've built, your cool architecture, your cool chef recipes and all of that stuff. You definitely don't want to take those questions personally. There might be some questioning about why you did something a certain way. It might seem that it's combative. In some cases, it could be. But I would say in my experience, it's usually not the internal auditor that's being combative. It's usually somebody else. But definitely don't take it personally. They're not there to bash you as a person. They're there to question about why you did a certain thing, because at the end of the day, there's going to be a totally independent person that knows zero about you, and they're going to be asking you a lot of those deep level, sometimes even uncomfortable questions that you don't want to answer, right? So definitely don't take those things personally. And as Wayne told me too, let your auditor say this on your behalf. That's why, that other bullet item about making the internal audit guy your friend is a really important one. Let him say no to the external auditor, right? They speak the language of audit, right? So the internal auditor definitely can tell the external auditor when he asks a question like, well, show me the firewall rules. Show me what that security group is, how that security group is configured. Let him say no. Right? Because there's definitely that boundary, right? They don't necessarily need to know that. And I couldn't give you the ins and outs about why he could say no. I just let the audit guy say no. It's a lot easier. But when you do get to the technology part of compliance, it's all about automation. I'm sorry for the really long slide there, but there's a lot in there. There's a lot about what we can talk about for automation and for compliance. So evidence gathering, definitely cover this one. Evidence gathering requires automation, requires a lot of automation. We all build robots every day, right? You know, whether it's a chef recipe or whether it's a CloudFormation template or some cool Ruby script that I wrote that deploys everything, or Jenkins. Let all of that automation do your work for you. Absolutely. You definitely want to be able to produce that really long firewall list, or that, you know, that asset inventory. You want to be able to produce it and give it to an internal auditor in 5 minutes. Why not, right? You absolutely want to be able to do that. You don't want to be going through an audit and, you know, you're like scrambling around and, oh man, where did I put that paper, right? Already, you know, that's the wrong answer, right? You definitely want to be able to hit enter at your script, or even better, you know, you have, you know, your nice little web app that you wrote and it's all right there, right? It's all right there, evidence. It's going to take you a lot of time to write this automation. You know, a lot of us have already done this beforehand, so it's just a matter of modification of a lot of my scripts. But you know, there's definitely going to be a lot of stuff you haven't written. There's going to be some stuff in the example, like when I was going through the audit, for sure. You know, fortunately for me, I was an engineering manager at the time, so you know, I had a team that I was able to work with, and you know, but it took a lot of time. It took a lot of time. You know, two of my people in my team took them about 2 weeks straight to get some of this data. You know, because mostly because we hadn't built a lot of the tooling around the automation of gathering data. But once we got it, though, it was really quick afterwards. You know, we were able to get a lot of this data back to the auditor very quickly. Definitely, for sure, and this is a huge part of Chef. We totally use Chef in this way. Self-described systems, right? Love Chef for this, right? Definitely knife node show -L. Awesome to kind of go loop through that. You know, I haven't really looked at Chef Analytics, right? I'm super excited to go take a look at that and see how that could be applied in compliance environments. Absolutely. You know, Chef has made it hugely easy for me to describe everything there is to describe about my hosts. You know, there's a whole lot of data there that's very appropriate. So definitely also, you know, get a lot of that log aggregation out of your systems. You definitely want all of that data about your system to be outside, for sure. Especially if you're doing a lot of heavy-duty AWS. In this case, you know, you're going to be auto-scaling quite a bit, so you definitely want to not have that data on instances that are going to be terminated 5 minutes from now. By the way, that auto-scaling throws auditors for a loop, right? Because they're like, what's the asset inventory list? Okay, this minute, it's this. Next minute, it's this, right? They really don't get that one. You want to see somebody's head explode in audit? Teach them about auto-scaling. What will you be asked for? Tons of stuff. You're going to be asked for a lot of different things. Definitely diagrams, and diagrams. Glyphy is your friend, right? You're definitely going to be asked for network diagrams, for sure. I talked a little bit earlier about asset inventory. You're going to be asked for asset inventory. You're going to be asked for, you know, what your cloud provider does for you. Definitely, if you're on AWS, highly recommend you go to their security and compliance page. There's a lot of really good information there that you can give to your auditors. Lots of stuff there. You're covered. You're going to have to prove that you're following your cloud provider's customer responsibilities, right? You're going to be following your cloud provider's best practices, right? Just because you're in AWS doesn't mean that they cover all those best practices for you. Right, there's a lot of stuff they do cover, but there's a lot of stuff that you're responsible for. And in the test phase, you're going to have to go through a lot of meetings. We talked a lot about that. And like I said, you know, let your auditor say no and be ready to document, right? Because, you know, why not do your system documentation using Chef, right? It's awesome. What's the sensitive stuff I'm going to be asked for? All of these things. Right? Stuff that I necessarily don't want to give to people. Again, let the internal audit guys be your friends and say no, but you're definitely going to be asked to provide a subset of all of these things, for sure. And kind of wrapping it up here, I've got about 5 minutes here, but kind of wrapping it up, where can I read more about compliance? Where can I get more information? At Evident.io, we're very tied into the Cloud Security Alliance. They actually have their cloud controls, their common cloud controls matrix that they have there. Very descriptive. If there's any document that you wanted to read about everything there is to know about compliance and the cloud, highly recommend it. It's gonna be long. You're probably it's gonna be on your iPad, on your tablet at bedtime, and you're gonna fall asleep at it for sure. I can guarantee you I do every single time, but it's all there, definitely. And when you go talk to your internal audit team, you're gonna, if you get prepared, you educate yourself a little bit on compliance beforehand. You're definitely gonna look like a really, really smart person. Even if you don't speak their language, right? At least come prepared. You're gonna make some friends. And again, in closing, compliance is continuous. You're going to do this more than once in your career. Of those of you guys that raise your hands that are doing compliance right now, how many of you guys, is this your first time that you've gone through compliance? Right? Very few. How many of you guys are pros? You guys have done this several times already. Yeah, a few hands, right? Absolutely. You're going to be doing this all the time. Especially if the audit team guys, got your number and you follow some of my practices here and you're friendly, they're going to know that, yeah, I'm going to work with Bob over there. He's a cool guy. He knows what he's talking about. Yeah, be part of the process. Be the process, right? That's what I like to tell DevOps people about compliance. You definitely want to be the process. And, have the attitude of bring it on. Bring it on. I'm ready for you. I'm ready to go through and do PCI. No problem. Give me a shout. If we're a sponsor here at ChefConf. I'm at, totally brain fart about which booth I'm in. But get a hold of me on Twitter, email right there. And there it is, booth 104. Duh. You guys are letting me look dumb, dude. Booth 104. We have a drawing for a drone. So definitely, if you haven't entered our drawing for a drone, I'd suggest you get over there and go do it before we close up shop. I don't know what time does the expo hall close? I don't know, 5 o'clock, something like that. So you got some time. We're gonna be raffling off a drone later on. Has nothing to do with cloud security or compliance, but hey, it's cool, right? It's your very own drone. So definitely love to hear comments. I've talked to I worked at our booth the last couple of days, and I've had some absolutely amazing conversations with people. I would love to have more conversations with you in the last hour we've got. But thank you very much. I know this is kind of a dry topic, but it's something that we got to go through. And have a great rest of ChefConf. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Any questions?
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation.
Problem.
I know the compliance can be really time-consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is here for our company, we are doing PCI DSS now. And there's really strict deadline for that. It's really critical. So I'm wondering, do you have any ideas how we can make this process going a little faster?
So how can we make the process go a little bit faster? Definitely the key to making the process go faster is automation. So the more you do ahead of time, and you can definitely there's a lot of documentation, like the CSA's done a lot of great work with kind of prepping cloud people for compliance. So I would definitely get educated on that, and like I said, controls are going to change internally as they make sense for your company. But definitely there's a lot of really good practices in there that you can follow. And so that could speed up the process. Definitely you want to work with your cloud provider if you're in the cloud, like with AWS, which I have most experience with. Definitely work with your AWS team. Go to the security and compliance webpage for AWS as an example, and then look through a lot of those reports that they have. Some of those reports are available openly, like you can just download them and kind of take a look through them. Some of the reports are actually, you'll have to sign an NDA agreement with Amazon, but highly recommend you go through those, and because that'll prep you for a lot less pain-free, or a lot more pain-free and speedier type of compliance audit for sure.
My question is about the controls and remediation process. Something that I run into a lot is our particular standard is the NIST standards, and you read the standard and it makes perfect sense, and you think, well, you know, we do that. That's a really straightforward thing to do. And then this giant game of telephone happens. The auditors come in and you try and explain what you do, and at the end comes this totally crazy remediation that doesn't fix anything.
Right.
And I mean, you gave some suggestions, but do you have anything specific for short-circuiting that, or what you do when that has happened?
Yeah. I mean, there's no silver bullet. I mean, I haven't gone through NIST myself. I mean, I know people that have. Like there's a guy at my company who's gone through it, and there's no, unfortunately, I'm covering my face because there's bright lights here, but there's really no silver bullet there, unfortunately. You know, it's mostly about, you know, trying to be human, right, with the auditor, and, you know, kind of suggesting that, hey, man, you know, because I went through this with some of the audits that I went through, is like, that makes zero sense. You know, how am I like, you know, what's my change control process for a security group change, right? A rule change is an example, right? This is just an example. And I said, we deploy using CloudFormation. We create security groups via AWS CloudFormation. That's dynamic. Every time we deploy an app, that security group gets deployed. The change process is, it doesn't make sense to have a change process. In other words, you know, you kind of have to do some education, and you kind of have to, like, you know, meet the person halfway, but it's really going to take a lot of patience on your part. That's really all my advice can be, you know. Because, yeah, in that case, it doesn't make sense to have a change control process for deploying, automatically deploying a security group. So.
Okay. So we have the Awesome Chef Awards over in the exhibit center at 4 o'clock. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody.